Hi, I'm Rebecca Thomson from Liberty Real Estate, and I'm here today with Mark Quinn, who is a tax advisor and chartered financial planner. There are so many benefits in moving to Portugal, and it is really important to get expert advice, not just on property and legals, but also on tax matters. So Mark is here today to hopefully help us shed some light on this topic. Hi Mark.
Hi Rebecca.
Thank you so much for hosting us today in your offices for this interview.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
So please could we just start with maybe you telling us a little bit about yourself and Spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. So Spectrum is a European advisory firm for expats based in Europe. And we have 51 advisors across the Eurozone, so quite a big team. And we cover 7 core countries. So we cover the key expat destinations of France, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Malta. And we also have offices in Luxembourg and Switzerland. And next year we're actually celebrating our 20th anniversary in business, so quite a big landmark for us. I've been an advisor myself over 21 years now, which is scary how that's flown. I'm a dual qualified tax advisor and chartered financial planner, both under the UK institutes. And I've been an expat here since 2014, so I previously worked for another advisory firm based here before starting the Portugal branch of Spectrum Group last year.
So Portugal has offered a lot of tax incentives, which is obviously a massive benefit to a lot of people who are looking to come out here, but it can get a little bit confusing. So could you talk us through a little bit about these different incentives, from the well-known non-habitual residency, the new D7, and I think there's also even an obscure Article 116?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point there, because one of the common questions I'm asked with new clients in particular is which route they go down. So they're often confused as to which route: D2 visa, D7 visa, golden visa, and NHR. And in particular, they think that NHR is a replacement or an alternative to a visa route, when it's not. It's actually an add-on. So it's a special tax incentivized scheme that lasts for 10 years. But as I say, it's added on to your residential status. So the most important question really to ask first of all is, how do you establish residency here? And there's several key ways. So the most simple is if you are an EU citizen. So if you're a citizen of another EU member state, then you have an automatic right to reside here. It's very, very simple. You just need to go to your town hall and get a residency certificate. If you're coming from outside of the EU, which now includes British citizens post-Brexit, then you have to go down one of the visa routes you mentioned. Now there's several, and my feeling is that Portugal are trying to be as welcoming and open as possible to new residents to the country. But the most common ones will be either the D7 visa or golden visa. And in a way, they're polar opposites. And I say that because the golden visa is very easy from a time spend requirement. So you only have to be here 14 days each year, which most people can do. The flip side to that is, though, you need to make a capital investment of at least several €100,000. And that's either, as you know, a property purchase or into an approved Portuguese investment fund. The flip side to that visa route is what's called the D7 visa route. And if you go down that route, you don't have that initial capital outlay. All you need to show is that you're in receipt of a passive income of some kind. And it's low, it's about €700 a month you need to show. But the downside to that is that there's a minimum time spent here of 6 months. And that in itself triggers tax residency. Now we'll cover tax residency a bit later when we talk about the non-habitual scheme. But tax residency isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be neutral. It can be very good for you. I've not really met anybody it's bad for here, to be honest with you. So then the other route that you can go down to establish residency is the Article 116. Now there's not much information out there on what 116, but what it means is if you've been a long-term resident of another EU state, and I think long-term is defined as 5 years or more, then again you can establish residency here. But I always encourage people, if they are going down that route, to seek legal advice. So moving on to the non-habitual residence scheme, which is what you asked me about. This is the 10-year tax incentivized scheme. And the name is confusing because non-habitual residence implies you're not resident here, when in fact it's the complete opposite. You need to be resident here. So you need to go down one of those visa routes and then apply for an HR. So what non-habitual residence means is you haven't been here as a tax resident in the last 5 years. That's the main qualifying condition. And if you tick that box, then you're effectively eligible for non-habitual resident status. And then it's just about making most use of your NHR status for those 10 years that you're here in Portugal.
Okay, perfect. So just to go back on that, so the NHR is the residency, and you said for that you would need to get one of the other visas, so the D7 or the D2, but that is if you are a British citizen as opposed to a European?
No, that's all. So if you're a European citizen, you have an automatic right to reside here by virtue of the EU free movement of goods, services and people legislation. If you're coming from outside of the EU, that's when you need to go down the visa route. But irrespective of which route you go down, you're always entitled to apply for an HR. So like I say, it's an add-on to residency rather than a replacement for.
So a lot of that information is in the public domain. So I suppose when clients can reach you, sometimes they'll be a little bit overwhelmed with all the information that they've been reading, perhaps on the internet or different sources. So that will lead to probably a lot of questions. So what would the most common questions be when a client first contacts you, and what sort of advice and guidance are you able to give them?
Yeah. So the most common one is what we've just discussed in terms of the confusion surrounding different types of visas versus residency status versus NHR status. It all becomes a bit muddled. And I think you've hit on an important point there, is that there's lots of good information from, say, a UK point of view or a Portuguese point of view, but there's very little information out there that explains the interaction between two regimes. So I would always encourage people to seek advice, A, locally here in Portugal, but B, from somebody that understands the interaction between where they are at the moment and the Portuguese tax system. As far as other common questions I'm asked, NHR is a big one, non-habitual residents. A lot of people are concerned about will they qualify for membership of the scheme. And in 99% of cases, they always qualify, because the government effectively wants to encourage people to come and live here and pay taxes and spend money here. The only time I find that people don't qualify is when they can't show that they have been tax resident elsewhere in the last 5 years. And then that leads on to another question, is should I apply for non-habitual residence? Because sometimes it's not very black and white. It does need analysis. In the vast majority of cases, it's always better to apply for NHR. It's a no-brainer from a tax point of view, but there are limited cases where, you know, we've come across clients that would have been worse off. So again, I encourage people, take advice and take advice early.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. And you were saying that you would advise that they find someone who can give them advice on both aspects. How do you come into that?
Due to our history as UK advisors, then typically we deal with a lot of British expats that seek our advice, but equally we deal with all nationalities because the principles of cross-border tax are very similar. It's about understanding the Portuguese tax system and the interaction between where they are at the moment and Portugal, and that comes down to analysing double taxation treaties. And again, they generally follow a template, so if you know one, you understand the principles that govern the rest.
And so beyond those most common questions, what are some of the more common misconceptions that you have come across that clients approach you with?
Yeah, that's a good one. There's two key ones that I come across on a daily basis. The first one is that the non-habitual residence scheme entitles you to live here tax-free for 10 years. Now, in some cases, you can structure your affairs so you are effectively living tax-free, but it does need a lot of planning. And there are situations where, you know, you will have to pay a level of tax. It can be mitigated, but it isn't necessarily completely tax-free. So that's the first misconception. The second one is that, to a large extent, people want to have their cake and eat it. And so the other situation I come across regularly is somebody that wants to, say, stay in the UK and live there, but they want to apply for the non-habitual residence scheme and not pay tax here and not pay tax in the UK. So, you know, like I say, you can't have your cake and eat it. If you are going to become a tax resident here, you have to pay taxes here to a certain degree. But more importantly, you have to be aware that you're not allowed unlimited access to wherever you're leaving, because otherwise you fall back under their tax net. And the UK in particular can be quite restrictive. You know, you can be tax resident back there by spending as little as 16 days there. So it's important to have a clear understanding of the rules of the country you're leaving, not just Portugal.
Okay, that's interesting. That kind of brings me on to my next question, which is more or less, if you could give us an idea, maybe using some examples of what is involved in sort of disentangling oneself from their original residency location. So maybe perhaps a British citizen versus, say, someone from Ireland.
Yeah.
What would be involved in that?
Okay, so it's a three-step process either way. The first step, if possible, if they haven't left there already, is do the pre-move planning, and that consists of two stages in itself. The first one is notifying the UK or Ireland that you're actually departing and the date you're departing from. I know it sounds an obvious point, but some people move here without notifying the tax authorities in the UK or Ireland, and therefore they end up in a bit of a mess. And the second stage of the pre-move planning would be to do the structuring that makes sense to do whilst you're still tax resident over there. So an example would be if you were a UK tax resident and you have individual savings accounts. If you close those down in the UK because they don't sync for Portuguese tax, then you can do so tax-free. If you delay that until you're Portuguese tax resident, you're going to pay 28% capital gains tax. So it's just about doing things in the right order at the right time. So then once you've departed the UK or Ireland, you do the post-move structuring. So it's taking advantage of exemptions that are better here rather than there. And then the third stage would always be future-proofing the end of NHR, because NHR has a 10-year window. You don't want to get to the 10-year point and then start trying to structure yourself for the expiration of the tax-free status. You want to be doing structuring and planning well in advance, and you can do that as early as year 2 into your NHR status. And as I say, the route and the process is very similar, irrespective of which country you're leaving. It's just the nuances and the planning will be slightly different. So an example would be on the day count restrictions I mentioned. You may have a 16-day count allowance back in the UK, but a 280-day allowance in Ireland. You know, it's very, very different.
Okay, interesting. And going to the UK, sort of looking at that aspect, because so many of our clients are British, what implications has Brexit had on this NHR, etc.?
Yeah, that's another question I'm asked. It's a good question, but effectively there's been no effect. Because the tax planning that we do for British nationals is determined by the UK-Portugal Double Taxation Treaty, and that in fact predates the EU anyway. It's from 1968. So that in itself doesn't change things. The only change that's happened really is the visa requirements. You know, prior to Brexit, we had an automatic right as British citizens to come and live here, which we don't anymore.
Thank you so much, Mark. That insight was really, really helpful. Thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
We hope you found that as helpful and informative as we did. Please feel free to reach out directly to Mark if you've got any specific questions, or visit our website at www.libertyrealestate.pt.